Welcome, everybody, to the Pioneers of Possibility podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Afsali. If you like the show, we encourage you to subscribe and follow us here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm really excited here to have a fascinating story and conversation here with Sol Salinas. Sol, welcome to the show.
Kareem, thank you for having me. I'm really sort of humbled and honored to be here with you and really look forward to the conversation. And have heard such great things about you and your podcast. So really glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate that, Sol, and that's really too kind. And tell me a little bit about what you do today and where you're at this moment, and then we'll get into a lot of your past.
You bet. So I am the America's leader for sustainability for Capgemini. Capgemini is an organization that's been around for 50 years. We're close advisors and consultants on the technology side of things, of course, now with AI, and very much on the sustainability side of things for companies all over the world. We're about 420,000 strong, and I lead the sustainability work for the Americas, which is Canada down to Argentina, and part of the leadership team on sustainability for Capgemini. I joined the firm in June of 2021, and I pinch myself every day that I'm here. You know, we see this topic as being sort of fundamental to who we are. It's part of our DNA. It's not transactional. It's not temporary. It's not a commercial thing. It's something that we deeply believe in, all the way down from our group, global CEO Ayman Azat, to our leadership team across the world.
That's really amazing. We're going to dive into some of the sustainability topics and different things that you've worked on. But here on the show, we believe that we're all informed by where we came from, where we grew up, and our past a little bit in our formative years. So tell us a little bit about your story. Where are you from? Where you grew up?
Sure, and thank you for the question. I was born in Managua, Nicaragua. I'm actually of Hispanic descent. My father's side of the family is from Nicaragua, and my mother's side is from what used to be the Soviet sector of Berlin, East Berlin, and they happened to meet. My father was a diplomat working for the president of Nicaragua back in the early 1960s, and met my mother, a 19-year-old German girl, in East Berlin at the time at a conference, and you know they
met in East Berlin.
In East Berlin, my father was on his way to Moscow on behalf of the president of Nicaragua at the time, and he stopped over at a small conference in East Berlin and met the young girl checking the conferees in, and invited her to dance. And he turned on his Latin charm, and one thing led to another. And he told her he was going to come back and get her after his trip to Moscow. Came back, told her that she was the love of his life, and went to her parents and said, "You have a choice. She can come with me and live a wonderful life, or she can stay behind the Iron Curtain." And the choice for the parents was a tough one, but they decided to go ahead and have her leave with him to Nicaragua. He actually left early, so he had false papers issued by the president of Nicaragua to have her released. Frankly, he couldn't leave at the time, so she was allowed out as a result of these diplomatic papers that were generated. So she landed in Nicaragua. I'll make this really quick, but landed in Nicaragua very quickly. My father was not there, and came to discover that he wasn't quite ready to be married or to have kids. And furthermore, his large family did not accept her, to put it lightly. And so she found herself roaming the streets of Nicaragua with 3 young boys within 4 years, trying to find friends, trying to find community, trying to find things, shelter, quite literally. We didn't have a place to live. So some of my earliest memories, Kareem, which I think go to the gist of your question, include walking the streets of Managua, because my father just wasn't around and wasn't ready to be responsible, and his family didn't quite accept this. So I think that builds resilience in children. They can go one of two ways. You could be scarred for life, an experience like that, or you can build the kinds of skills that maybe very few people build, which is sort of the ability to survive in a tough environment, the ability to sort of understand, what's needed, the ability to begin to adapt, to be agile, and to be resilient. I'd like to think that some of that maybe carried over into my adult world.
And what were the circumstances that led you to work your way north?
Yeah. We'll fast forward maybe a couple of years. I have two brothers, one a year older and the other one 2 years younger. And at one point, my mother's mother came to Managua at the age of 65, was allowed out. And my mother and her mother decided this was not right. So they took the three of us on a very small merchant ship from Nicaragua, from Managua, a port called Corinto, through the Panama Canal up to the northern Atlantic and landed in Bremen and left without my father knowing it while he was away on a trip. And so we spent some time in East Berlin. My father.
So you ended up back in Germany.
Correct. My father decided to come back and apologize and said he was going to clean up his act and that he had landed a job in Mexico City. And therefore, everything will be fine. We went to live in Mexico City in 1968 during the Olympics and the student uprising there. So very tumultuous time. Lo and behold, my father lost his job. So we went back to Nicaragua. A couple of years after being in Nicaragua, again, the same situation sort of repeated itself. We were on our own. He was traveling to Machu Picchu and met a gentleman on the bus. If you've been to Machu Picchu, you take a bus or you hike up to Machu Picchu. I met a gentleman who was recruiting young, talented professionals to come to the U.S. and study at a funded program, OAS funded program at Florida State. My father talked his way into the program, and came home and said, I'm going to Tallahassee, Florida. I'll see you in 2 years. So about 6 months into that trip, he called and said, why don't you come visit me? So my mother was reluctant at the time, but we decided to go ahead and do it. We literally came to the U.S. with, as they say, just the bags that we could carry for a 2-week visit. As soon as we arrived, my mother's fought tooth and nail to essentially stay here as long as possible, and she kept extending the visa. We were undocumented for quite some time. That's what brought us to the U.S. My two brothers, myself, my mother, and the situation at home was still not particularly good, but we survived it.
So Jake, I had this question really for the end, but Jake had mentioned soccer saved you, changed your life. I mean, how did that impact you?
It did. I mean, we ended up, at one point, Kareem, we were supposed to go back to Nicaragua after my father's studies were completed. That was the deal that he had made and the other students had made, which was they were going to study at Florida State, complete their studies, and go back to their home countries to disseminate the knowledge, if you will. Unfortunately, 2 weeks before we were scheduled to go back to Nicaragua, there's a huge earthquake in Nicaragua, 8.2 earthquake in Managua, which destroyed the city. So we had no place to go. The director of the program at the OAS, therefore offered my dad a job in Washington, D.C., which is what brought us to Washington, D.C. I quickly discovered the sport of soccer. A young kid sort of saw me kicking the ball against the wall, and he and I became inseparable. And he invited me to play on a select team. He said, you've got potential. Next thing I know, I'm on this travel team, didn't know the implications. And I grew up playing it. And it was my refuge, Kareem. Everybody has a place that's their own. And the family life was no better than it was in Nicaragua. My father continued to do what he did, which was not exactly sort of the kind of, the kind of behavior that you would expect. But in any case, he had his own issues. So I practiced every day. It was my place of refuge. It's what gave me confidence. It's what gave me friendships. And to this day, I'm very beholden to both my friend John, who found me, and his father, who was my coach, who picked me up every single day. And like I said, it was my place of refuge. As I got to learn the game, I couldn't help but translate some of the concepts of the sport to some of the things that we encounter in large organizations or small organizations, for that matter. I'm a big believer of tiki-taka soccer, FC Barcelona, if you happen to be a fan of soccer. Pep is one of my favorite coaches, and I do believe that possession soccer is the way it should be played. That playing anything short of that or anything different from that is perhaps sort of a shortcut, as we did for years, Kareem, in the U.S., playing what they call direct, which is kick and run. I always felt that was a shortcut. So when I played and when I coached for years, I coached for two of my older boys. I always believed in enforcing the importance of connecting and emphasizing the importance of thinking ahead, playing it forward, of these concepts in soccer that also pertain in the world of business.
So the concept of possession soccer really is winning the time of possession battle, thinking a few moves ahead to pass the ball around to, sometimes you're not always in the offensive zone and you have to go back into the defensive zone in order to 3-4 moves ahead, get somebody in position to score. I mean, that's my sort of soccer viewpoint of what possession is.
Exactly.
Be more
some of those principles. I mean, the possession soccer. At one point in my career, back in the middle 2000s, I led a team. I was with Accenture at the time, and I led a team that helped the Loan Guarantee Programs Office at the U.S. Department of Energy, that you may be familiar with, sort of organize themselves, and the leadership team of the Loan Guarantee Programs Office reached out to me and asked me to facilitate several offsite retreats to see if they can sort of connect better, align better, use the same language, and move in a singular direction. At the time, they were moving in different directions, and I used possession soccer as a sort of one of the guiding principles for every reason you just described. You've got to think ahead. You have to think as a team. Before I collect the ball, I need to have support in front and support behind.
Well, when we get into the sustainability discussion, this is really also important for ensuring that sustainability is actually a sustainable practice, right? That we're actually able to make good on the promises, whether it's corporate, whether it's personal, and as society. I also want to just reinforce what you said about soccer, right? Team sports have had just enormous effect on countless kids as a refuge. If their home situation is bad, school situation is bad, team sports as a resiliency builder and as self-confidence builder, right? So early in your career, you ended up in EPA and different civil service organizations. And as I understand it, you were one of the lead folks in creating the Energy Star program. What were the circumstances? How'd you birth it?
I went to undergraduate school at the George Mason, where of course I played soccer, and then immediately went to graduate school at the University of North Carolina. I had a joint degree at the business school and also in the journalism school. When I came out, Kareem, I went into the advertising business for no other reason than the fact that I really liked the textbooks. I liked the pictures. I liked the people. I thought it was cool. And I landed at a small, mid-sized, high-powered agency in Baltimore, Maryland. And about a year and a half, I was brought in by the CEO, by the way. About a year and a half, he came into my office and said, I've got an assignment for you. I'll get to Energy Star in a moment. We've got a pro bono assignment from the World Resources Institute, which is a large, of course, environmental think tank based in Washington, D.C., that had started thinking about how to educate the public about the greenhouse effect. I mean, at the time, there was a lot of sort of back office discussions around the importance of climate change. It wasn't called climate change then. It was called global warming, of course. And there were efforts to try to get the attention of the White House. And the World Resources Institute was very active in those discussions. And they hired us to develop a public service campaign around the greenhouse effect, and I led that effort. Thank you very much to the CEO of the agency. And it was an enormously successful campaign, by the way. We developed a black and white public service full print ad that went global. It went sort of viral, as viral was defined in 1989, placed in all sorts of different media, as remnant space, public service advertising, and I made a lot of the calls. And the headline was, let somebody else worry about the greenhouse effect. And it was a baby that we took a photograph of a baby in Death Valley, sort of for dramatic effect. And of course, the headline was cynical. We can't let somebody else worry about the greenhouse effect. That campaign was enormously successful. And I had decided that I wanted to change what I was doing. That campaign transformed me into an environmentalist. And I said, look, advertising is fun. I have no problem selling hotel brands or bowling alleys, etc. But I want to do something with purpose. So I made several phone calls.
Let me ask you one thing about that campaign. What was your biggest, beyond sort of a career change to environmentalist? What was the biggest scientific thing you learned during that process?
Yeah. That if you ask, they will say yes. I learned very much. I mean, I spent a lot of time with sort of publishers and editors and production people with, major news magazines. We were very targeted in our efforts, Business Week, and some main news magazines like Time and Newsweek. And I was spent a lot of time trying to convince them to give us that remnant space. If an advertiser pulled out, can you put our ad in its place? And I was surprised, Kareem, about how many times they just said, absolutely. So I learned that, you just have to ask. Be prepared to get both answers. And in some cases, you won't get the answer you want. But in many cases, when you ask, you'll get the answer you're looking for. Biggest lesson from that effort.
I would say, just to piggyback on that, when I was, at PDC in the business, talking to salespeople, they can't say ask if you don't ask, right? So if you don't ask, you're too shy to ask, you're never going to get an affirmative or a negative. But chances are, you may have a conversation about it that could lead to a yes in the future. So I appreciate it. I apologize for cutting you off, but I wanted to get that. So let's continue. So you want to be an environmentalist.
So I started. So I said, well, I want to do something different. I want to do something that's meaningful. And that was my mid-20s at the time. So I called my client at the World Resources Institute to say, can you help me? And lo and behold, she connected me with some folks at a very small office at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency at the old waterfront sort of, headquarters building of EPA in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you remember those days, but the EPA was headquartered right along the river, and just not the best environment in the world, not the best location in D.C. And she connected me to this obscure little office. And lo and behold, before I knew it, Kareem, I was interviewing for a job of director of marketing. And there was nothing, I had no idea what I was marketing for. And I was interviewing with a second tier subcontractor that was a sub to a prime contractor, ICF Consulting, that was doing some work for this obscure little skunk works office at EPA. Seems like I did well on the interview. They said, you're going to be director of marketing. So they put me in front of the client at EPA, a gentleman who I consider to be one of the pillars and one of the most influential individuals, certainly that I've encountered, and I would say many of my peers encountered on the climate change topic, a gentleman by the name of John Hoffman, who ran in this obscure division within EPA, the climate change division. And he interviewed me, and I think something clicked. And it clicked within 15, 20 minutes. And he said, we need you here. He said, we're going to have you be the director of marketing for a bunch of things. And I said, what am I marketing? He goes, I don't know what it is yet, but you're going to make it a household word. And I said, I'm in. So he parked me at the second tier subcontractor because it was a hiring freeze at EPA. And I was a director of marketing. I didn't know what exactly for. And we started in that. Then I began to figure out exactly what it was for. This individual sort of office led by John Hoffman took it upon themselves to launch a series of very innovative public-private profit-driven programs aimed at climate change to promote sort of a partnership between industry, academia, the environmental community to address climate change. And we launched a program called Green Lights, which is an effort to enable the use of compact fluorescents at the time. And of course, the flagship program was called Energy Star. And Energy Star was born, Kareem, after several happy hour discussions that we would have with John Hoffman and several folks at these small little dives on the sort of the riverside of the Potomac River across the street from the waterfront. And we simply asked ourselves, what can we do? How do we engage the consumer? How do we engage industry on the topic of global warming? And what can we do to enable them to do something about it? And we said, well, hey, why don't we maybe begin to sort of manufacture products that are energy efficient? Doesn't energy efficiency reduce the use of carbon? Yes, it does. And so what kinds of products maybe can we work with? And do you think industry would listen to us? Maybe they will. So we called them in to have a consultation. What kinds of products? Well, what kind of products would consumers use daily? And this is in 1991. Well, maybe everybody will use a desktop. So let's get some of the desktop manufacturers to come in and see if they'd be willing to manufacture products that are more energy efficient and be recognized by EPA. Well, how do we recognize them? How about if we affixed a label on these products? And what if we called them Energy Star? And I had a little napkin after about 3 glasses of wine at one of these happy hours. And I said, what if the label looked like this? 6 months later, we launched the Energy Star program for computers. And we were off and running. And as I mentioned earlier, Kareem, we were on the call with the engineers who were manufacturing these devices, and we specified exactly what types of energy efficiency benefits they needed to achieve in order to gain the right to display the Energy Star logo. And we started with computers, and they all said yes. We manufactured this logo, very much, by the way, against any sort of regulations that EPA had at the time. EPA said, we have a logo, we're EPA. We said, well, we need something different. So we defied almost every rule in the book at the time, federal rule or Environmental Protection Agency rule, to launch the program. And we did. And then we rolled it out to other office equipment products, then home products, of course, then buildings. If you fast forward now, Kareem, as of 2025, if you look at the collective greenhouse gas emission reductions of the Energy Star program since its inception, it is equivalent to removing about 5 billion cars off the road, which is about 2.5 times the size of the U.S. fleet annually. So it's been an enormous success. And as you probably are aware, I mean, it was on the chopping block recently as a result of the cutbacks of this current administration. And several of us got together and tried to lobby for its continued survival and succeeded in doing that, including major players who had been vested in the Energy Star program from the beginning. And it does survive. It has now its own line item in the federal budget, and it's been moved over officially to the Department of Energy. So that's sort of the history of the Energy Star program. But I consider it. I have 6 children, Reem, over 2 marriages, ages 35 to 9. My daughter's the youngest, and
bless you.
I consider the Energy Star program my 7th offspring.
Your 7th offspring. I consider hydrogen my 3rd offspring. So the we're similar in that respect. The Energy Star program really has given consumers a very easy and visible thing to make consumer choices, right? So you want to buy a refrigerator, there's 5 in front of you. 4 of them have the Energy Star, 1 doesn't, right? So, and then the Energy Star logo goes along with that yellow kind of cost saving based on the energy input to keep your food cold or frozen, right? So, and it has truly empowered the consumer to make really good decisions, of course, for affordability, but also consumers who deeply feel that it's meaningful to make a contribution to sustainability and energy efficient choices. This program, you're right. I appreciate that quantification. So you said 5 billion cars removal over the lifetime of the program. I mean, that if you were to compare that against any other program in our government, is there another program that comes close to that benefit?
I would argue it's a great question. I would argue that if you look at the different metrics of success, meaning the level of greenhouse gas emission reductions, the level of corporate investment, R&D investment, the number of jobs created, the number of industries created, Kareem, the level to which it enabled and engaged and educated the consumer about climate change, the extent to which it spawned similar programs around the energy transition space, whether methane programs, whether programs around hydrogen, as I mentioned, the Clean Cities program earlier, which was spawned out of Energy Star, Water Sense, which is a program that was a mirror image of Energy Star, only on the water topic. If you look at all those metrics of success, I don't believe there's a single program, federal program, by the way, whether on the environmental side of things or elsewhere, that's a public-private partnership that's had the kind of impact that Energy Star had. And as I said earlier, the individual responsible for its genesis was John Hoffman. Interestingly enough, quick story on John Hoffman, by the way, which, like I said, is one of those unsung heroes of the program, was he unfortunately passed away in the mid-2000s. And there was a ceremony, of course, held on his behalf, and it was going to be held in downtown D.C. It was canceled because Hurricane Sandy passed over D.C. on that same day. A hurricane that some might argue was one of the strongest hurricanes that ever hit the mid-Atlantic. And many climate scientists will tell you it would not perhaps have taken place, or it would not have been as strong, but for the fact of climate change.
the weather events are getting more extreme. We had kind of a brutal winter, so one of the more cold winters that we've had. But then also last summer was one of the hottest summer that we've ever had, right? So climate change is certainly making these weather events more extreme. As part of that program, final thing on this program, and then we move on. You worked with a lot of corporate partners, right? So you worked with folks in appliances and office equipment. Give me an example of sort of best experience and some of the biggest pushback that you had received from industry. How did that manifest itself?
Interestingly enough, Kareem, we didn't get a whole lot of pushback from industry. I mean, the program made so much sense. It was such a triple win. It was a win for industry, of course. It was a win for the environmentalists, of course. In many instances, we had executives from oil and gas sit across the table, from directors from Greenpeace and National Resources Defense Council, and we all sort of ended up nodding in violent agreement that this made sense. Most of the pushback, if I can be perfectly transparent, came from inside the government. One of the other sort of unsung heroes of the program was a gentleman by the name of Don Nankis. And I don't think he would mind if he heard what I said here. But one of the early assignments that John Hoffman gave me when we launched the program is to walk the halls at EPA and get an attorney's approval. And I went to the first attorney, and he violently resisted and said, "No, I'm not doing it." Went to a second one. He said, "No, this is not what EPA does." We faced a lot of resistance, Kareem, especially on the outreach, on the legal aspects, but we just cut through it. We danced around it, frankly. And our mantra was easy to ask forgiveness and permission. And we asked for a lot of forgiveness.
A lot of forgiveness.
I remember I was on a phone call with a marketing lead from Nike. And we were talking about co-branding because Nike had adopted the Energy Star benchmarking for buildings, and we had talked about doing some co-branding. We did a lot of that work because the EPA could only do so much. We relied very heavily on the brand cachet of our partners, McDonald's, whether Nike, whether HP, IBM, et cetera, and most of our marketing actually ended up being on their part. And so I was on the phone with this marketing executive, and the point of the conversation was to get them to agree to help co-brand, their materials with the Energy Star label. So what that taught me, Kareem, was that somehow we had made it. There was enough cachet around the Energy Star brand. We had pushed it so hard that now we didn't need to push it. Now it was going to pull itself along. The market was going to pull it along. And we had so many conversations like that where I sort of came to the realization that all the hard work that we had done to convince these brands with enormous brand equity, global brand equity, the Coca-Colas, the HPs, the et cetera of the world, that all the work that we had done to sort of convince them was now behind us. Now it was just now the market was going to demand that the Energy Star be there.
So you said some of the challenges were internal, right? Would you say that the internal challenges were because of just kind of bureaucratic inertia that has its thing and people are resistant to change, or sort of and you served across multiple parties of administrations, right? So, political change and process, and then that working its way back into the particular department. I think both have weight, and I'm curious which one was more difficult.
Making that bureaucracy, I think, to use your term, move outside of the status quo was enormously difficult. I mean, you like the example with Don Nankis and the letter of intent is just one example, but every single day we had to sort of, push the envelope. And like I said, easier to ask forgiveness. Any document that we had to produce had to go through just umpteen levels of approval by individuals who had absolutely no clue about the nature of the program, the intent of the program, our mission, our success, why it was important to develop the materials that we did. So I think that was very, very hard, frankly.
Moving from one type of bureaucracy to another, right? So you have moved on since to a long career in consulting large corporations, small corporations along their sustainability journey. So tell our audience a little bit about how you made that decision to make that move, and how you have found corporate America, and I say this as a company who had pretty robust ESG mandates, CSR, that we measured sustainability of supply chain, greenhouse gas emissions of the organization of the building, of our operations. How has that evolution been during your career in consulting broadly? I know that's a really big topic, but it was super hot, I would say, some years ago. And then over the last 5 years, it's cooled down with really large companies almost having their, zero emission fuels mandates sort of disappear, right, without a lot of fanfare.
First, let me just say this. At one point in my career, let me sort of connect back to the beginning of the story. My father he passed away in 2003. And so that was sort of another fork in the road for me. We went back to Nicaragua and buried him in Nicaragua. It's the first time I had been back in Nicaragua since 1971 when I arrived in the U.S.
My goodness. Okay.
To the country. As soon as I arrived back, I felt at home in some weird karma sort of way, and I met with family that I hadn't seen in quite a long time, and happened to be actually hiking a volcano and saw a sign. And I'll get to sort of your question if I could in just a minute. I saw a sign that was put up by USAID and said this is a project sponsored jointly by the World Health Organization and USAID to promote self-drinking water in Latin America. That was it. And I said, that's kind of cool. And I'm sorry. And it also included EPA. I said, that's kind of cool. I didn't know EPA was down in Nicaragua. So, of course, that's my home agency back home. So when I came back to the United States, I sort of felt that I wanted to give back something to Nicaragua, that I had ignored my homeland, my alma mater, if you will. And maybe for my father, I could do something. So I placed a call, Kareem, into the Office of Water, our sister office. We were the Office of Air, the Office of Water at EPA, and just got spoke to a couple of different people. I said, who's the owner of this program? And what's the nature of this program down in Nicaragua? Ended up speaking to a dear friend of mine, someone who became a dear friend of mine. And she said, hey, your timing is perfect. We're having a briefing on this program for the assistant administrator. It's a program jointly sponsored by USAID, WHO, and ourselves. Why don't you come? So I attended the meeting. In the midst of the briefing by WHO, an elderly, attractive woman came and sat next to me, and my seat was empty. And she sat and listened. I asked, as I always do, a lot of questions. I said, oh, look, I'm new to this. I don't even know, but can you tell me blah, 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 blah. Introduced myself as Energy Star and so on, which immediately got attention. About 6 weeks later, my friend who introduced me to the meeting, Stephanie, called me and said, Sol, in case you want to work on water issues and you want to be involved in our work with Latin America, there's an open office director position about 2 levels above where I was that we're interviewing for. Why don't you come in? And I interviewed for it. And of course, there was a highly coveted position, office director at EPA, to run the bilateral office of the Office of International Affairs. And my friend said, and by the way, Judith, the lady who was sitting next to me, was the assistant administrator. She was the ultimate decision maker. 6 weeks later, we went over to the Office of International Affairs and ran a number of international programs on climate, of course, air, toxic waste, nuclear, et cetera, and just had a wonderful time and just a wonderful experience. At one point, I was presenting as a representative of the Office of International Affairs, and a gentleman from Booz Allen saw me present, and I was talking about some of the work that we had done in Energy Star, and he came to me and said, hey, we're looking for someone. And I was now looking at college expenses for my children and so on. And it was just an offer that I couldn't turn down. And that is what led me to the consulting world. And everything that I learned at EPA with the Energy Star program, everything that I learned in international affairs, I used every single day in the consulting world, including my stint at Accenture, which is where I came from before I was here. And I use every day. And some of the things that I share with you here, Kareem, which is the importance of asking and being prepared to get a no, but also not being surprised by getting a yes, no matter what you ask for. The importance of finding individuals in industry that are champions, that are willing to go to bat for a cause. and they are worth their weight in gold.
Without the champion on the other side, in terms of whatever it is you're doing, if you don't have champions at multiple levels, right? Certainly you need the higher level support, at least support, right? So, but then you get the champion below to help grind out some of the hard work that could show the value to the person who's administering a particular program or whatever it is. And that can create lasting and meaningful change in those organizations, which then can project themselves into lasting and meaningful change in sustainability, which gets me sort of back to the question. So this is how you ended up in consulting, but you have done a lot of work in consulting for corporations and people along their sustainability journey and in ESG and CSR. And well, if maybe I boil the question down a little bit, give me an example of really good success and places where you didn't have the butterfly and how you handled that.
Absolutely. So I think, back when I was with the Energy Star program, Kareem, I think we used to, say to ourselves, those of us who were working the program, that our mission in life was to put ourselves out of business. That at the end of the day, if you're a sustainability professional, we need to, the success is measured by the extent to which sustainability is a decision critical factor in everything you do in your business. There's a separateness to it that keeps it from succeeding. It has to be part and parcel of every decision that's made. And we used to say that about the Energy Star program. And I think in large part we succeeded. I don't think we've succeeded in the corporate world. And by the way, I've told our teams the same thing here, including our leadership, that there should not be a separateness between sustainability and how a business operates. So we've at Capgemini, we have taken that to heart. So when we talk about sustainability, of course, we talk about the uniqueness of certain capabilities and platforms and tools like ESG, platforms, which are, a prerequisite for informing the marketplace about your sustainability journey. But at the end of the day, the sustainability journey has to be defined by the extent to which business decisions are guided, for example, by double materiality, by the extent to which you inject, societal costs and environmental costs into every decision you make. Imagine a scenario where a CFO at a Fortune 50 adopts and forces their team to adopt inside-out materiality with everything they do. Then sustainability is not separate; it's part and parcel of your DNA.
That mind shift change, I mean, it's absolutely critical to sort of the continuation of our planet and the species, right? So it's that decision makers see these environmental impacts and decisions as critical to their customers' future, the workers that you're employing, the community in which you're incorporated in, and investing the dollars into the surrounding businesses and supply chain and all this wraparound services and support that are supporting your employees, your customers, and all these different things. It's something that society needs to move closer to, and organizations need that ethos change. Quicker now than ever.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would add to, if I could, as was the case with the Energy Star program, we always sort of made sure that, again, that there was a profit aspect to adopting environmental practices. And we always sort of said that there needs to be no compromise in quality with Energy Star products, and there needs to be an ROI for the organization that adopts Energy Star. That's the same case now across all aspects of sustainability. Wouldn't it be great if every senior decision maker or mid-level manager, for that matter, acted based on an altruistic motive? Yes, that would be great, but that is not the case. So we are living in a time when you can actually do the math and find that the math is an attractive, presents an attractive alternative, a sustainable alternative, whether it's in procurement, like I said earlier, whether it's in HR, whether it's in IT. Digitizing a manufacturing space or making it smart often results in 30% reductions in energy use, which of course translate into carbon emissions. I mean, there's so many different business models that we can point to that support the notion that if you do the math, you'll find that you will the ROIs can be very, very attractive, anywhere between 15% and 40%, depending on the project.
We need to get leaders to move away from short-termism to short-termism, if that's a word, right? To be diligent and look at the math and look at the longer-term returns, because they do pay off ultimately in the end, and it's a strong business decision. Which gets me sort of to the final technical thing, and then we'll wrap up here. AI, right? So, and the proliferation of AI data centers and the energy that's needed. I don't know if you have a holistic view. I think renewable energy depends on where you are and what kind of energy solutions. Lots of people are looking for a silver bullet. My personal engineering sort of opinion is there is no silver bullet. It's going to be a geographically, kind of geopolitically reasoned in terms of what ends up happening. In your practice, how are people working through these decisions?
My thinking about AI is the following. We're still in honeymoon period. Every new technology has sort of a honeymoon period where the appeal of the technology, whether it's the horseless carriage or whether it's, the airplane, you name it, has a certain period where, just the seduction of the technology is such that it sort of, it marginalizes all sorts of considerations. That's certainly the case with AI. And so do we think that the individual sort of using ChatGPT or any other, so Perplexity or Claude, et cetera, is actually thinking about the environmental impacts of the query I'm putting forward? Probably not. That being said, those who care about these things, including those of us at Capgemini, are beginning to think about what does sustainable AI look like? Isn't it possible, for example, for a Gen AI platform to bank certain prompts and then harvest those prompts when a user 4 weeks later asks the same question? Why would you have to sort of recreate a sort of the paths to the answer when in fact perhaps a platform can just simply take it off the shelf and repurpose it? And
using the context of their discussions with this chatbot.
Correct. So you begin to harvest sort of lessons learned, right? I mean, and full advantage of the machine learning aspects of AI so that you're not fully recreating the query every single time. And if you're able to harvest this repository of existing AI knowledge, perhaps you can get your answer at a fraction of the CO2 emissions and water use that you might otherwise use. So I think that's sort of something that I would suspect we'll see soon, and we've begun to think about that within Capgemini. We're not there yet; it's still honeymoon period, but I would hope that within the next few years, there'll be sort of a sub-industry, if you will, that's devoted entirely to that. We are doing everything we can to make sure that when we calculate the carbon or sustainability benefits of the work that we do at Capgemini, that we net out the AI, the costs, if you will, the water, so that we're fully accurate and transparent about that, and we inform our constituents and our clients about that. But, again, we're still in honeymoon period.
I think one thing that would be very useful in these AI chatbots, it's almost an Energy Star reminder that if I want a superhero picture of myself, right? At the end of every query, it gives you a grams or kilogram use of carbon. Like, it took this much energy input in order to create this. It could, somewhere in the subconscious of some degree of users, provide a level of, maybe I just use a regular Google search engine this time, or use my colored pencils to create my own cartoon image of myself, as opposed to burning 10 kilograms of CO2 every time. Well, I don't like that one, so I want to do this one, and then I burned a car's worth of energy to create something that I'm going to look at, share with my friends, and then be done. So it's a bit of self-responsibility, but it requires a bit of a prompting from sort of the master creators of this technology to help us get there. I want to learn about net positive. So talk to us about it.
So, I'm the hopeless romantic when it comes to the topic of sustainability, Kareem. I think those who work with me, both within Capgemini and outside of, have noticed that when I get on not this one, by the way, but when I get on, let's say, other broadcasts, platforms, I have a background. And the background always is an environmental photograph of some sort, whether it's a receding glacier, and just to remind ourselves that the problem is real and it's immediate and it's right in front of us. And about 5 years ago, when I first joined Capgemini, I came across an old friend, Andrew Winston, who's one of the pioneers in the topic of sustainability, who had just recently launched a book along with Paul Polman, one of the sort of one of the most legendary mythical figures, frankly, in the topic of sustainability, who used to be the CEO of Unilever, of course. They had launched a book called Net Positive, and I ran across the book and read it very, very quickly. And I reached out to our leadership team at Capgemini, having just joined, including our CEO at the time, Jim Bailey, and our global CEO, Ayman Azad, with an idea to invite Paul Polman and Andrew Winston to our marquee sort of C-suite conference event in Monterey, at Pebble Beach, rather. And lo and behold, we had them both there, one virtually, Paul and Andrew Winston. And we entered into a discussion about Net Positive and why they wrote the book. And it just really resonated. I sort of still believe that if you look at everything we're doing, Kareem, on sustainability, we're still moving backwards. You know, one of the uber metrics that's used in our community is something called Overshoot Day, which is the day in the calendar that represents sort of the day where, you know, we as a global community have expended the resources that the earth is able to regenerate that year. Ideally, you want Overshoot Day to be December 31st. We only use the amount of resources that the earth is able to regenerate every year. Well, Overshoot Day keeps moving up the calendar every year, and it's July 25th this year, which means we're using about almost two worths of planet Earth every year that doesn't get regenerated. So that tells us we're moving backward. Many other metrics that I could probably use to describe the problem. So net positive is, I believe, sort of the X.O version of sustainability. Is moving beyond net zero, moving beyond zero waste, moving beyond zero water, moving beyond climate neutral towards a reparative, regenerative
system. Mm.
And so the whole notion of it is what has to be true for us to develop business models and to have businesses and enterprises adopt these regenerative business models at a profit. And what's the kind of system change that we need to see? So I set out to sort of build a global coalition advisory board around that. That included chief sustainability officers of some companies you would be very familiar with, Cisco and Logitech and AT&T and Intel, et cetera. And we formed an advisory board that was co-chaired by myself and Andrew Winston. And we set out to ask the question, led, of course, and chaired by Capgemini. 4 or 5 years later, we now have a global community of over 250 organizations that have been exposed to a sort of a maturity model on net positive. We sort of took the concepts of the book and operationalized them in the form of a framework. Andrew and Paul talk about the soul of the organization, leadership, back to sort of the individual. What kinds of leadership characteristics would you have to look for in order to be able to make this happen? You know, what's the soul of the organization? And so we developed a framework to measure that and to determine what needs to happen within the organization to inculcate that across its leadership and across its entire, headcount, if you will. What's the bloodstream of the organization need to look like? And of course, what are the impacts and outcomes that you measure? So we developed this construct and turned it into a maturity model. And I'm super excited about it. We're still at it. You know, this reminds me of the Energy Star days when everyone thought we were nuts and crazy. And now nobody, again, everybody knows what the Energy Star label looks like. It is my hope, Kareem, that 20 years from now, we'll look back and say, why didn't we do net positive? The default position is to be net positive. The exception is you're a laggard and you're not doing it. That's just the case with energy efficiency.
Well, I mean, this sounds truly remarkable. I mean, a few years ago, I met the person who was running the Global Climate Pledge out in Seattle, right? So they were trying to get the Fortune 500 companies, everybody to sign a pledge to get to net zero by 2035 or something like that. But this is many steps forward in the sense that it's getting people to commit to and put practices around regenerative practices so that instead of July 31st being the time when we've used up all of the Earth's resources, you can start to incrementally get towards next year. And maybe you can even push that into a future calendar year at some point in our future. I think somebody has to do it. And your energy, Sol, and your passion and vision certainly are, I feel, rejuvenated. I came in the conversation today as a little somber and sort of the world's sort of world geopolitical situation, what's happening, but I feel truly reinvigorated from my conversation with you. And interestingly, on regenerative policies, next week I am interviewing the author of this book, We Are Eating the World, Michael Grunwald. And it talks about our food systems, from land use, water use, the attempts at artificial protein that tastes like animal protein. And it looks at all these different systems and hypothesizes what the world could look like, what it's doing to our world, number one, and then what are some pathways that we could get so we're not like truly eating the world from kind of a situation of constrained resources like we're in. So I appreciate your energy. I appreciate your story. And I appreciate the passion of which you have brought really tremendous change here in the United States to our systems with Energy Star and now with Net Positive moving forward. Do you have any parting words for our listeners today, Sol?
I was just going to say thank you so much for having me, Kareem. I mean, you're doing such wonderful work, and I sort of now regard you also as a kindred spirit, and I'm happy to come back at any point. I'm happy to support you in any way you think it would be helpful. You're the latest butterfly that I have now discovered, and so please keep doing what you do, and don't hesitate to reach back. And to the listeners, again, just keep in mind that this is a very, very small, fragile planet that we live on. That pale blue dot is a very fragile place, and unfortunately we live on a surface, so we think it's infinite. We think it's full of resources that will always be there. That is not the case. That is certainly not the case, and so it's up to every single one of us to take care of her.
Thank you, Sol, for that. Everybody, please hit subscribe, and look forward to our next conversation with the next guest coming soon. This episode of The Pioneers of Possibility has been produced and edited by Danny Vagnoni, with music credits going to the artist known as Sahari, and artwork for our podcast is presented by the artist known as Layla. I'm your host, Kareem Afzal. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode and you would like to hear more from future episodes, please follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and click the subscribe button on YouTube. And please leave a comment so we can engage our listeners. Thank you very much. See you next time.